What the heck's going on, Vortex Nation? You know, we are so fortunate to get so many great comments on our podcast on the Vortex Nation YouTube channel, but only one can be the comment of the week. Now, this comment comes from at CWEast-DI2BQ, and it's in relation to a podcast we did a while back with Brian from Day 6 Arrows at press time. Man, a lot of archery seasons have kicked off. If they haven't, they're likely about to. So that's why I picked this comment from an archery-related podcast. It goes as follows. I have to admit, I started watching this video expecting to spend only a few minutes watching. I'm not an archery hunter, so I didn't think there would be much that would pertain to my interests. However, I couldn't have been more wrong. I was astounded at my lack of knowledge in archery, and listening to Brian break it down in ways that made so much sense was a joy to watch. I can't hit the broadside of a barn with an arrow, but after listening to this, I think that I may get involved. Great interview. Man, nothing is more music to my ears than that. Hopefully inspiring somebody to get involved with something new like archery. Man, I hope you have done it. If you haven't, I'm going to suggest that you do it again. And maybe just the prompting that you need will be your very own super sweet Vortex Nation podcast hoodie. We're going to reach out to you on the old YouTube comments, make contact, and get one of these headed your way so you can look really good shooting your bow. Without further ado, let's start the show.
When we think about sniping, you can go buy an off-the-shelf precision rifle, and then you can look at what an elite military unit will have. It'll bear almost no semblance. This is the equivalent sniper rifle to the pistol need that they had.
And this pistol, one of the reasons it's maybe dated now or we've gone in another direction is because this pistol takes a lot of human interaction to put together. That was the norm back then.
What is up, everybody? Mark on the mic. Jim to my right. Haven't said that in a minute.
Sorry.
Mr. Adam Maxwell and Mr. Ryan Muckenhern across from us. On the table in front of all us, we have just a plethora of 1911s. That is the topic of conversation today. Pre-hitting the record button, we finally just had to hit the record button because we were talking about everything under the sun. Ryan was saying things about 1911s that we should probably say on the podcast. Adam was self-professing that he was embarrassed about how much time he'd spent on the 1911 forum. And we also heard about his fourth grade fight.
That I won.
Okay, that is a very important distinction.
Yeah. Currently undefeated.
Is that your one and only?
That was the last one. So you're only as good as your last race, right?
That's true.
There you go. I mean,
you can always hoist that belt above your head.
Yeah, undefeated.
No one can take that from you.
The 1911, guys, this word gets thrown around. I throw it around. I say it a lot. But it's hard not to hear this is an iconic pistol.
Oh, yeah.
Oh, nobody could argue that.
To put it lightly, I think.
Yeah. I mean, is it the iconic pistol?
It's I mean, I think there's a few.
Yeah. I mean, as long as places that put up the no firearms allowed in here sign keep using the Beretta 92.
Or the Steyr M9. At the airport.
Yeah, as long as we keep seeing that, those will always be up there for people who have no familiarity with firearms and only see silhouettes. But I mean, the 1911 I've seen, as being a classic forever.
Yeah.
Well, and like you look at it, like while I was doing some research for the show here, like if you look at its contemporaries at the time, like the Mauser and the Borchardt and things like that. Like,
wait, what was the name of that one?
The Borchardt.
Okay.
See, it's when a pig.
Yeah. Like when they were, I mean, this pistol was one of the successful designs that was in the turn of militaries converting away from revolvers, and they actually commingled with revolvers at the time. So the concept of a semi-automatic pistol was so new at that time that it was successful in that time and then remains in current new production today.
Right.
You can't buy a new inbox Mauser. You can't buy a new inbox Luger. You can't buy, you could go down a Walther P38. a lot of those pistols, a lot of their attributes live on in current modern pistols. They themselves do not. The 1911, in its adulterated and unadulterated form, still live on in current production today under several tents, not just one. I mean, you look at, or even firearms in general, like try to buy a brand new inbox Winchester 94 today. You can't.
Well,
Kind of.
Yeah.
It's
got a crossbolt safety.
See?
Wrong.
The function and form factor so radically different than its predecessors.
Yes.
Oh, yeah.
And largely everything now is a derivative of it. If you have a pistol that has a tilting barrel, like it drops a little bit when it comes out of battery, that is based on the Browning design. So everything that uses kind of the tilting barrel concept is essentially borrowing or evolving upon this platform.
It really ushered in a new era of pistols that has not left.
Well, yeah, I mean, you see all kinds of different things that have slightly different form factors or silhouettes, but really, when you boil down what they are, at their most fundamental selves, is not any different. People do a different cut here or there, a different way the magazine releases, or a different cartridge or something like that. But it's the same thing. We haven't seen anything catch on that is dramatically different as was the 1911 from someone who was shooting, revolvers back in the day.
Adam, what would you consider yourself? Are you a 1911 enthusiast, aficionado, fanatic?
Freak?
I mean, it would probably be fair to use all those terms.
Well,
I'm
in a good way.
To Jim's
positive
point, like that is the escalation.
Right.
So
it starts one way.
That escalated quickly.
Yeah.
he's like the cat lady of 1911s.
Kind of. But there's like so many different nuances in the world of 1911 that you could collect. Like I definitely probably fit in the realm of collector.
Okay.
I don't own anything. I don't shoot.
Okay.
Also, for those watching on YouTube, everything on the table is not necessarily mine. Everything I have is not necessarily on the table. You can see the refrigerator gun or the shower gun, but not at the same time.
Yeah.
It's important.
I do want to make a statement.
If you are getting a look at my shower gun, you better look out.
Right.
Because
you're just going to feel inadequate.
Yeah.
After that.
Well, no, I was going to say you've surprised me in the shower, and I'll you know what I mean? If you're in my
right.
Mark's
hence
not just reaching
the part where I feel.
Yeah.
Is that what you're going for?
Yeah.
I'm assuming that you're wanting me to drop the soap, and I'm going to fight back.
Yep.
With my shower gun.
To what Adam had said, he's like, I shoot them. Some people, I'm guilty of this. I have guns that I've bought that I've never fired. I have guns that I bought that I fired 5 times. When I look at the table, everything that would make sense to carry in a capacity that one would, they all have holster wear on them.
I have at least 500 rounds on all these guns except Jim's.
Not this
one.
I brought mine. But as far as, honestly, I'm sort of wondering if maybe you did sneak into my house.
And that's my favorite part about you, and always has been, is like you don't necessarily buy something because it's cool. You buy something because you have purpose for it, or a need for it, or a desire for a purpose and need. And my God, you use them.
Mm-hmm.
I can tell these have been in the hand and in the belt, and they've got the marks on them that prove it. So
I usually buy one that I'm interested in shooting a lot, whether it's for competition. I have some that are very competition oriented, USPSA single stack flavor, and then we'll probably get to it. I kind of have a fascination with sort of the late 90s, early 2000s fighting pistol, and then there's also stuff that I carry. I have one on order now that's I would anticipate being a carry gun. That's really the purpose for it. So
talk real quick about the fighting pistol, because that is something that has gone through, just an interesting evolution over time.
Mm-hmm.
Because the 1911s was, it was, everybody says it, 2 world wars, right? But even still,
that took a while.
I know, right? Yeah, we're 7 minutes in. I just had to get it out there, right? So, even after that, though, I mean, well into the decades that followed, you still had police officers carrying revolvers. And then it was like, I don't know, we entered into sort of a no man's land of a couple of decades before then we started having the plastic pistols like the Glock come out. And it took a while for people to really be able to trust, air quotes, Tupperware, you know, and then we sort of entered into a time period where it was like, well, anything that's not a polymer frame double stack 9mm pistol is garbage. And I don't know if we've come out of that fully.
I think we're emerging from that.
It feels like we are. But there are, I would assume still to this day, I know fairly recently there were units that were fielding 1911s for, I mean, fairly serious professional duty work. And
if you go visit law enforcement agencies in California, you'll see a lot of 1911s still to this day.
Is that a culture thing or a requirement thing or both?
I think little column A, little column B. I think it's on the required or on the approved list. And I mean, LAPD has a lot of heritage involved with everything that they do. So they're still out there. If we're going to talk about in sequential order, but like if we were to skip to the end, I think some of the elite military units are starting to revisit this platform in its evolved version, in the high-capacity version of it.
Right.
Staccato has definitely rebranded the 2011 and made a big splash in law enforcement and military circles, kind of updating a lot of the criticisms there, and so it's getting looked at again. And I think that kind of comes back to your original question. So, like the fighting pistol, like where did this come from? If we go back to the beginning, we're going to skip over the 1900s pretty quick, but like at the beginning, we had essentially the 45 Colt. You know, a lot of people who watched Western movies would relate with the Peacemaker. So the 45 long Colt single action pistol, that was a revolver. That was the military's issue up until they wanted essentially a double action pistol. When they went to a double action pistol, I'm looser on what those models are.
1917.
The 1917?
Yep.
It wasn't even before that.
There's number 3. So like a Smith number 3 top break.
Yeah, so they got into that. Yep. That was chambered in a 38. And we were not trying to colonize the Philippines.
Oh, that gun.
Yeah.
That the Marines had.
Yeah.
That led us.
Yeah, that led us to the 1911.
They tried to shoot a lot of people, and they didn't stop because we would later find out in the 90s why that was. But essentially,
they were under the influence.
They were under the influence. They were passionate about not being colonized. And so at that time, in the world of ballistics, we didn't understand the difference between lethality and incapacitation. Incapacitation usually is very lethal, but lethal is not always incapacitating. But anyway, the Army was saddled with this 38 pistol, and they didn't like it. So they were going, and round about the time that it was also like we should be looking at semi-automatic pistols. And they did a test that was highly controversial at the time, would never get approved of today, even though it kind of makes a lot of sense, because really the reason it was controversial is because people kind of have a naivety about what happens when cattle turn into beef.
Yeah.
Oh. Same thing like when deer turn into venison.
Okay.
So when they were going to do a ballistic test of pistol cartridges, they went to the stockyards in Chicago and shot cattle to see what would happen. And it was scientific for the time, pretty crude by today's standards, but they would essentially shoot a cow and a hanging carcass and see like how much it would swing. Like they were measuring this kind of thing.
Yeah.
And measuring, and they were timing how long it took to die. That also evolved into using human cadavers. They would shoot human cadavers, measure how much it would swing. The result of this test was, bias or no, that pistol calibers 45 or larger were decidedly better than pistols 45 or smaller. So in the Army's solicitation of a new pistol must be 45. At this time, our Lord and Savior John Moses Browning was working on what would become the 1911, but it was chambered in 38. What would it be? 38 Super
auto.
or 38
Just
Auto?
38, well, 38 Colt.
pre super 38 Colt. He got the intel though that the Army is looking for something in 45, so he essentially created a 45 caliber for his pistol that met the military specifications, similar to the trials we see today. We want it to, have this kind of bullet. We want it to go this fast. We want it to be this heavy. We want it to this and this and this and this. So he made one of the pistols that was submitted to that. Ultimately, he won. A few others were submitted. The most successful one at that time that was its contemporary would be the German Luger.
Yeah.
And a couple of them were actually made in 45 for the test. I believe 2.
Yeah, 2 or 3. One sold at Rock Island a couple years ago.
Yeah, number 1 didn't survive the test. Number 2 is in a private collection, I believe. That is in the Knights Armament Reference Collection. I think those are the only 2, but it's the $1 million Luger.
Yeah, I think that was brokered, I thought, through Rock Island a few years ago.
Yeah.
Beautiful gun. It's just a Luger, but bigger.
Yeah. And so that is, and you got it right in front of you there, Jim, that is essentially the 1911 we know of for 2 world wars.
The A1?
Well, the A1 would be between World War I and World War II. People would give feedback they wanted a shorter trigger. So we've regressed in this matter, but essentially this would be on your pistol a longer trigger. Now we would call this a medium.
Okay.
But it had a flat mainspring housing, which is the part against your palm. And they wanted instead an arched mainspring housing, which gives it a little bit more of a, by today's standard, a little bit more of a Glock feel, but kind of revolver-ish. A shorter trigger, and then they scalloped the frame a little bit so that people with smaller hands could reach it. And people of that era were smaller than us.
That's such a weird thing to think about.
But essentially that became the A1. So they did a couple rolling changes to make the A1. And this was around 1925. World War II kicks off. We make a lot of guns. All of them. There are still 1911 A1s in surplus being sold through the civilian marksmanship program. The last time the Army bought 1911s was in 1945. So all the guns we would see through the Korean War, through the Vietnam War, into the 80s, and even beyond in special operations, those were all legacy World War II guns.
That's so fan.
They bought them.
Crazy.
Yeah. And so all that to get to your question here, where I start to get interested in some of this stuff was essentially we had the military changing over into Beretta M9 9mm to standardize with NATO on the 9mm cartridge. Military being a very traditional sort of organization, there was some resistance to that. One of those resistances was within the special operations community. And so, and they had a bit different of a requirement. Like a standard issue military sidearm is really a symbol of rank. It's used as a defensive weapon. In other countries and militaries, it's used for assassinations. It doesn't really do a whole lot. But in special operations, especially in the 80s when they were starting to spin up anti-terrorist units, those guys were using pistols in an offensive role, and they were shooting them a lot. And they had a very high accuracy standard. And so they were using match grade, essentially national match 1911s from that World War II era, highly customized into a fighting pistol. And they used those until they ran out.
Would you say there's anything on the table similar to that here? Like the TRP?
The TRP is probably closest to what that would become. Yeah. So they essentially would modify. They would put better sights on them, better safeties. They do some trigger work to them. Mainly it was the actions though. They were putting better barrels, tighter fit bushings in there so that they could get an accuracy standard. And then this pistol would last longer, being built to a higher standard. These guys shoot for their job. So when you're shooting a unit is shooting 1 million rounds of 45 a year or more, they're using these types of pistols. And then the part that I get interested in, essentially they ran out of World War II guns. Like they shot them until the frames cracked. There were no more. We have no more. We need to solicit new guns from the private sector. And that triggered a trial similar to the FBI trial Essentially, they're saying we want a 1911 of these specs built by, and the custom pistol builders of the industry would submit their pistol. And I think a lot of those pistols lived on as flagship pistols into the 90s and currently. So out of some of that, you have the TRP. The TRP is a derivative of who won the FBI contract. I don't have this confirmed, but the Wilson Combat CQB, that was their submission to it. Didn't win, but they made it, lived on under the moniker CQB. So Les Baer did one. They called theirs the SRP. And then who else had one you think that was in there? A couple small shops you never heard of. Clark was in there.
Roland.
Yeah. There was a few, though, that made these pistols for that unit, and then elite units in military and law enforcement kept using these throughout that era, and so that kind of made the era of the custom 1911, that was the part that I kind of latched on to.
Colt would have had like a Series 80 gun.
Yep.
That eventually morphed into, I guess, what we would have known as like the Desert Tac.
Mm-hmm.
If that was what that was, it called Desert Tac or Desert Warrior. Yeah.
What was it about what they were doing in that era? I mean, I don't know if it's like really worth going into or if it's a huge rabbit trail, but what was it about what they were doing in that era that required this fighting pistol so much more than, a rifle or,
well, I
guess a rifle really, or
it
carbine?
Was, from what I understand, it was unit, a lot after the 1911, most pistols that hit the market were kind of they were just good enough, but they kind of needed the fail-safes against, draftees, people who weren't gun people but needed a gun in their job. So when I look at a pistol like a Glock or like a M9, like a SIG, a 226, something like that, and then evolving in today, I mean, if we look at the contemporary striker fire pistols of the day, the 320, the Glock, the M&P, the Walther, those all have essentially the passive safeties. They all have polymer frames, so they're easy to mass produce cheaply, and they're kind of just good enough to do what guns do without people hurting themselves as much as possible, right? Separate out these other guys who is like, okay, you look at full-time SWAT operators, HRT and FBI, the unit in the Army, DevGru in the Navy, people who just do hostage rescue and CQB as their primary job all the livelong day. They train up for it if they're not doing it. So they shoot a lot, and they have a super high accuracy standard. So if you read some of the stuff about the early Delta selections, one of the things they would do, they call it the hot seat. Everybody in the team would take a turn in the shoot house. It was a shoot house full of targets, but there was a person, you had to sit in a chair, there was a target over your head, your team was going to come through the door, and they were going to shoot past your head. And everybody had to take a turn sitting in the seat. From what I understand, they don't do that anymore, but I don't know. I was never there. But the story goes, in Beckwith's book, they did that. So those kind of guys who are shooting that much and they have that accuracy standard were the guys who wanted a pistol like this. And there haven't been very many pistols since then that could be tuned to that level, or were at least chasing that level.
An interesting way to think about this is, and it's hard to break what you were saying about the ease of production with something like a Glock or a SIG or whatever, and the quote good enough standard. Mm-hmm. When we think about sniping, you can go buy an off-the-shelf precision rifle, and then you can look at what an elite military unit will have. It'll bear almost no semblance to what that off-shelf option is. This is the equivalent sniper rifle to the pistol need that they had.
Especially in the 80s, that was when airplane hijackings became a thing, and that's what stood up a lot of what we see today currently as anti-terrorist units. So a lot of their training was around working inside of airplanes. Inside of airplanes, they were either using subguns or they were using pistols, but a lot of their training was specifically with pistols in quote-unquote an offensive role.
And I suppose if to tie it back to optics, if we look back at that era, there wasn't necessarily a spec for like an M4A1 or a Mark 18 that
Correct.
even existed that would then support an optic conducive for success in the operation. So the pistol becomes the next likely thing, or you're issued an MP5, right? Like that was also your subgun flavor at that point.
And in and around that time, we have this caliber conversion, right? The Army transferred, the military at large transferred over to the 9mm. And so FBI adopted their whiz-bang 115 grain super screamer bullet. What was it, Winchester silver tip or something like that? But anyway, in the Miami FBI shootout, they got into a big gun battle with the guy, and essentially the first shot fired from an agent from I think it was about 30 yards. The first shot went through the guy's arm, actually this arm, the right arm, so it went through his right arm, through his lung, and stopped like a couple inches short of his heart. A lethal wound, dead man walking from the first shot. He would not be incapacitated, though, continued to shoot a bunch of agents, which triggered an entire review of what we today know about internal ballistics or terminal ballistics of a bullet.
What was he shot with?
He was shot with a 9mm hollow point. But those hollow points at the time weren't designed to retain their mass. Essentially, they were designed to hit and just start to like come apart and do tissue damage, but they didn't retain their mass to drive through. And so this is where the FBI protocol on gel testing would come from. And so at the time, this is where we started to see, this is where they would shoot all the different calibers and whatnot. So the FBI, Congress having just heard why we need to switch from 45s to 9mm, could not be, they couldn't go back to the Congress and say, well, what we really need are 45s again, like you just told us we need 9mm. That's where the 10mm came from.
Well, then they also look like idiots or something like that.
So essentially they made a smaller bullet of a similar weight, pushed it at a velocity faster so that it kind of did 45 things but same but different, but still same. And so the whole 10mm thing went on. That's a topic for a different day. But the SWAT team of FBI was still like, no, we still want 45 because we still want the knockdown power and all that stuff. Many, many years later, I've watched the federal ammunition ballistics demo. We've been doing a lot of stuff with them lately. And so in their presentation to law enforcement agencies when they shoot ballistic gel, essentially now what we understand is that a good bullet kind of does the same thing in any caliber, and in pistols it either makes contact with something lethal or incapacitating or not. And until we can push a pistol bullet faster than 2100 feet per second, pistols bullets are going to do what they do. And so that's where kind of we've regressed now to, oh well, the 9mm is just as good. Well, I mean, it's kind of the same, but then you get into the other trade-offs of it all. But at the time, when somebody was shot with a 9mm and not incapacitated, all the full-time SWAT guys were like, well, we don't want that. We still want 45s because Dad shot 45 in the war and it like stole the guy's soul. So that's kind of what had this perpetuate for a significant amount of time until really the late 2000s. And I would say what ultimately undid that is the evolution of 40. From what I've heard, the unit in the Army, the anti-terrorist unit, was looking at 40, and essentially they decided they were going to go to 40, and it was a matter of which gun was going to shoot 40. Thing about cartridges, you can load them to suit a pistol. Well, essentially the chambering of 40 that they wanted favored a Glock pistol, and a 2011 pistol, a wide body 1911, won't feed a cartridge like that as well. And so it was like, well, these guns don't work. Well, it's kind of like, well, it wasn't really. You're putting 87 octane in something that needs premium. They could absolutely have loaded a cartridge that would have flipped the test, but essentially the need or the desire to go to 40 and into a striker fired pistol is ultimately what kind of tabled these for 10 years until the wide body pistol was largely re-perfected, and it's making its penetration into the fighting pistol world again, because nothing has really replicated what you can do accuracy-wise, longevity-wise, and what the triggers are like in these.
They're like a
any
rifle.
platform. Yeah.
Phenomenal to shoot.
Yeah.
So nice.
Yeah, that is really interesting. Can I tell a 45 story?
Yeah.
I was hoping you would. You've told it before. I know what
really
you're going to tell. But
can't
Okay.
wait to hear
I
this
was
one.
I was going to request it.
I had a customer, World War II veteran. Was born in 1919. He was a great guy. His name was Clayton.
I think that's when my grandpa was born.
And Clayton, when I met him, was at least 161 years old. And he was an impossibly tiny man. And so he was born 1919 or 1918. I have to look back at his headstone. And this would have been circa 2006, 7, 8, 9 in that time frame. So he was an old man. And he'd come in. And so he was a second wave into Normandy, and hard war for him. Made it out obviously unscathed, and came back with a long life. Retired in 1967, I believe, which is crazy to think about. Anyway, Clayton was telling me why he favored the 1911 so much, and I sold him a Kimber Grand Raptor.
Oh, wow.
Yeah, and he fell in love. And I sold him all kinds of guns over the years, but he saw a Kimber Grand Raptor sitting in my display case there, and he walked with a cane, and he smacks a glass. He says, "Package up that Colts government." That's what he called him. And so we get him going, and I always love doing 4473s for him because he wrote with the penmanship of a man of his era, but with the wobble of a man of his age.
Oh.
And so like his 4473s always had this very distinct printed cursive
Italicized.
with a shake. And so we get the transaction done or whatever, and Clayton's telling me about his landing into Normandy. And after some time in country, he had become convinced that the 30 M1 carbine was a completely ineffective man stopper. And he says it didn't matter how many times you shot him, where you shot him, you could never win with a 30 carbine. Just hated it. And so he convinced another officer who was issued a 1911, Colts government, to trade him. And through some trade, ends up with a 1911. And he says, I'm working through this French village, and I come around the corner of a house, and I'm face to face with a young Nazi. And he goes, I looked at him and he looked at me, and I know I didn't want to die. He knew he didn't want to die, but he was a Nazi. So he goes, I shot him in the leg and he was dead. And he goes, and that's why the Colts government and that throughout my entire upbringing in firearms, I'd always heard that the 45 was this, quote, mythical man stopper, and that if you hit somebody in the hand with it, they were down for the count. And I believe at the time, as you're talking about all these, of course, the trials, and then into the evaluations that the FBI had conducted, and that units were doing independently, and then anecdotal reports from the street. On paper, now we understand a lot more about exterior ballistics, terminal ballistics. A 45 ACP, depending on what metric you subscribe to, is not a spectacular cartridge from like a terminal performance standpoint, if you're somebody who says velocity is this or energy is that. And it was projectile technology at the time that was any of the rounds that we've talked about's shortcoming from a terminal standpoint. And we've gotten to the point now where we can engineer a bullet to do a thing in 9mm that before was only reserved for 40 or 45. Or conversely, we can engineer a bullet for 45 ACP that can stomp the guts out of the other two aforementioned. And it's just an interesting thing to me that as far as we had come from post-World War II to 1980s with respect to cartridge development and pioneering of bullet technologies and practices that today are still holding water better than the newest, latest, and greatest that we can throw at them, pistols were left on the table. They were just like a slightly better version of a rock or stick that somebody could carry or hold. And it was truly those very niche groups with extraordinarily specific requirements that kept fanning the coals that then ultimately led to flames that got us to where we are today with a lot of this stuff. And I just find that fascinating that we kind of forgot.
Well, and a lot of it's often forgot that a lot of the military stuff, Geneva Convention, they have to use full metal jacket. They're not allowed to use an expanding bullet. Well, if you can't use an expanding bullet, then yes,
Got to go with the big one.
a bigger bullet than a smaller bullet is better. But like as soon as you enter into the world of expanding bullets, well, yeah, they all expand. They all do very similar things. And like as much 45 as I've shot, and still, I mean, I'm still carrying 45, in my pocket today, but that's my wallet. But
it's about the same size, though.
Mix the dang things up.
Like, I mean, I still carry around 45 today, but
HSTs?
And I'd like to pay with this.
But
God, you are so damn classy.
I think you know what I mean when I
say.
say.
We got to stop for a second. Adam and I are the same age. Adam's at least 30 years older.
Yeah.
You have a leather magazine wallet for your 1911.
No clip.
That I bought with my first 1911 holster that I carried with that GI.
Golly.
That was my first carry gun.
No clip on it, nothing. It just
in my
sits
pocket.
in there.
A vintage
keeps the lint out.
vintage chip mag too.
I think
This
I think
company isn't even. It's not even called that anymore.
Yeah, I think that's the first one too. I think that's
Golly.
But like, I like 1911s. I have no illusions about what 45 does as a caliber, but I like 1911s. 1911s work best as 45s.
Yeah.
So I carry 45.
Yeah.
Well, I mean, it makes sense that it works best with a 45. I mean,
because it was designed to be
first.
Yep. And all the other calibers that we shoot it in, because we have guns on the table that are 9mm, we have 10mm, we have 40s. They're all working off the same magazine, but essentially they just start crimping it so that it'll feed a smaller cartridge, and then they put a spacer in it so that it doesn't nosedive off the top.
Yeah, everything always works best the way
it's a retrofit until we got into something like the EDC X9, where they start to use a completely purpose-built 9mm magazine and built a 1911 style pistol around a caliber again. They essentially re-engineered the gun around a caliber again.
Yeah.
But yeah, that was always I like 45. I mean, I like 1911. Same reason I like Benellis. They just feel good when you shoot them,
and they work too.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, like the locomotion of there's a bunch of different things that are stacked on top of each other that you feel as a recoil impulse, and when the gun goes off. Similar when we talk about suppressors, right? There's the burn of the powder, the crack of the bullet, and then the cycling of the action and all that stuff. So all that stuff stacked on top of each other, like a 1911 just feels better to me when I shoot it. Feels better as 45. Of course, you can shoot a bigger bullet, and then a game where we're trying to hit certain scoring zones, you can shoot bullets that score better.
Just by diameter.
And then this is a semi-wad cutter, so it has a square shoulder on it. So this is essentially like shooting a hole saw through the air when it hits a target. It doesn't punch a hole through the paper and kind of like tear the edges. It like cuts it.
Huh.
Cuts it like a hole saw for your drill, for like drywall.
No ambiguity in the score.
I see. Yeah.
Because it punches through with a square shoulder.
When you said square shoulder, I got like
a right angle, not like throwing cubes through the air.
Yeah, my brain like sort of froze for a second because I'm picturing sending a square down the.
It's just slightly smaller than the paster.
Yeah. So like I like shooting 45, but not commercially available 45. Just like I like shooting 40. But not commercially available 40. Right. Like I like what it can be made into. But yeah.
So you're reloading all of your 45?
Oh yeah. Yeah. I mean, if I come across some factory loaded 45, in the wild that needs rescuing, I will. I will rescue
for the
it.
brass, of course.
Yeah, for the brass, so I can make
you
wad
set those
cutter
bullets
loads.
free.
Yeah.
But,
They do. They are phenomenal guns to shoot. They're so neat. One of the things that I was wondering as we were talking through some of the history of the 1911 and how things got to where they are today. One of the things I'm curious about is with the world's switch to 9mm at some point in there, why was the Browning high power? Like, why was that always just such a niche, whatever, oddball? It's got some like real cult following to it, and I think they've brought it back new.
It's a couple times.
It just never catches.
It never catches on and becomes like super popular. But when you look at it, like to a non-gun person, if I held up
On paper, it
You
makes
know,
sense, right?
One of these guns, one of these 1911s, I held up a high power next to it, and I said, say the difference between these. They'd say it's the same gun.
Yeah.
I mean,
Single action, high capacity. I mean, when you hold the EDC-9, it's about that,
Mhm.
right? So we have many of the attributes of the conventional 1911 higher capacity magazine. I think they held 15.
Yep.
High power.
That one does, yeah.
And it was kind of the best of both worlds. But I don't think they ever saw U.S. adoption in any.
No, not really. Very popular in Europe.
Yeah.
So it might just be something we don't like because the Europeans like it.
And
Well,
Belgian,
Belgian
Belgian gun
now
from the
that you
get-go.
mention it,
There's a guy at the match a couple weeks ago shooting
nowhere.
one, and he's like, I'm
Jeez.
going to make this into a poor man's 2011. I kind of was like, well, like not for nothing, dude, but if that could have been done, like it would have happened
been
a
done.
long time
Yeah.
ago.
It would have been done.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
Although there are, I mean, like I think Nighthawk will still do, and a few other custom shops, they will do full house high powers.
That's so cool. That's
Yeah.
it's very nice pistol.
It's very niche.
Yeah.
But also a JMB design.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
There you go.
Well, and that one
his
actually,
unfinished design. Yeah,
that one has carried on, funny enough, too, like with the Browning name.
Mm-hmm.
Whereas the 1911, I suppose maybe it just had to do with the fact that it became the military adoption and then just was out there for so long that everybody else started to make them. But it's just funny to me that could you ever go and buy a Browning 1911? Maybe
Yeah.
that's a dumb question.
They had the
Not till
night-
recently.
Yeah. Not.
Because
It was-
Browning was a designer and an inventor.
Yeah.
Right.
He was also, well, actually, I think it was his brother that was the businessman. But so he would make something, and then he would sell it to Colt.
Right.
He would make something, sell it to Winchester. He would make something, shop it around, and it would get picked up.
Okay.
And so in the U.S., Colt had the rights to 1911s. FN had the rights to the high power, and I think FN kind of pushed it that way, especially because it was past his death. I'm speculating a little bit, but a lot of his designs were sold through other companies, and like the name Browning, like today we would recognize Browning as a manufacturer's name. I think that surfaced many years later.
At the level of commercial success.
Right. And
But-
right now it's really just a brand owned by another brand owned by a conglomerate.
Yeah.
Okay.
Correct. Yeah. So like, to Adam's point, he was solely designing
Yeah.
and then selling said prints.
Yeah.
And then
That was how you made money at
Yeah.
designing things if you didn't have the manufacturing capacity.
which so few did at the time.
Colt and Winchester and all them at the time, they were kind of like they were just focused on building things.
Yeah.
And so if you bring them a thing to build, so like a lot of the 1911s made during the war, one of the more common ones to find is the Remington Rand. Remington Rand was a typewriter company, and essentially at the time, while there was still a armory and a ordnance corps, essentially the U.S. Ordnance Corps would hold the data package for what the weapons were, similar to what Russia would do with the AK-47, right? So they have the tech package of how you make an AK-47, and when you join the Warsaw Pact, we will show you how to make AK-47s, and that's how they were made in all those different countries. So same thing when we kick into wartime production, it's like, all right, we need more pistols. Here's what we need you to make, and then the companies who had machinery and labor and all that stuff to do that kind of stuff, they're like, well, we could do that, and it would be like this much.
Yeah.
And that's where in the world of collecting war era 1911s, which is something I am not into, I haven't personally purchased any, but like the holy grail of 1911s is the Singer sewing machine.
Mm-hmm.
They were marked Singer sewing machine. Singer made those pistols. They were of very good quality, but Singer also knew what they were worth. They were expensive to buy. They lost the bid. So the only ones that exist were that pilot run of them that got evaluated, and they were contractually obligated to produce. But U.S. Army said, nope, we're going to buy them from Remington, Ithaca, and there are some marked Springfield, but Springfield was still
This is
they were still a armory at the time.
this is an excerpt from an article on, I want to believe it was like it's like the military history website, written by Matthew Sharp. So hopefully I'm giving enough credit. But
It wasn't just the author on Wikipedia?
No.
Okay.
This seems pretty official, Jim.
This is real. I got it on the internet.
Says, with the assistance from Remington Rand, Union Switch, and Signal Company.
Union Switch and Signal is another one.
And even the Singer Sewing Machine Company, Colt was eventually able to supply the Army with significant numbers of pistols. So that's kind of like post-1926.
Yep. And when I actually first was old enough to buy pistols, when I actually transferred that Dan Wesson, the guy that I was working with, friend of the family, he was a collector of 1911 pistols, but he was a collector of the war era ones.
Nice.
So he had a specimen at the peak of his collection. He had a specimen of all the prototypes. So the 1900, the 1901, the 1902. He had all those. He had every variant of the wartime production ones. 1911s and A1s, and then into post-war commercial ones. And similar to how dudes would go to a car show now, like you pull up your car and they get judged. So he would go to a gun show, but not like a wheel and dealing gun show as much as it was
an exhibition.
Like an exhibition thing. And he would put his collection on display and it would be judged, and he had the official documents and the official papers and all that stuff. And then essentially his side business, his tax write-off, if you will, was wheeling and dealing in that kind of stuff. So he would hand me a pistol while I was talking to him, getting his old man stories out of him, So this is 21, 22-year-old Adam. He would hand me a pistol like that, just look like a Colt, 1911, right? He just handed it to me, talk about it a little bit, and I would go to check the chamber, and he would nope, don't rack it, because condition and finish is everything on those. But he would continue to tell me the story of whatever it was he was talking about.
And Adam, you've carried on that tradition with your 1911s.
Right. He would, what was fun and what I would later do in the store, he would say, yeah, pistol like that. And now this is 2011 or so. Pistol like that cost $5,000. I would try to hand it back to him, just these very rare specific serial numbers, specific types of bluing. There are different eras of types of chemical bluing that Colt did. They have subtle tone differences. They would collect all the variants of that. But in that era of pistol, that's kind of how it was. They were shopped out in wartime production to who could make them. They put in bids, and then some of the ones who bid too high didn't get the big contract. Well, those are the extremely desirable ones now, because ultimately they didn't make very many pistols because they were the more expensive ones at the time.
Talk about an era bygone. We have a situation on our hands as a nation, and the .gov turns to the manufacturing titans of this country, Union Switch and Signal. It's not their purvey.
General Electric.
Yeah, GE.
Yep.
International Harvester.
Yeah.
You start picking up M1 carbines and M1 Grands, and you start reading the names on them, and you're like, what?
Yeah.
And it's we've got to make 100 million guns.
Yeah. Or
Okay.
the Nazis are coming.
Yep. We're retooling and like that, right?
Do you want to keep speaking English? Make guns.
Yep. And it's so odd because I can't formulate how that would happen today.
Well, and people were like, heck yeah, I'm in, and instead of oh, well, I don't know if I like firearms.
Or we need to provide aluminum for airframes. Does anybody have any pot and pans that we can melt down? Yep. There's a wagon coming through town. Chuck them on there.
And they made so many that there's still some that are new in storage.
Yeah.
And
That's incredible.
We've fought how many wars since then?
Yeah.
It's just mind-boggling to think of how much material, how many Jeeps, how many trucks, how many helmets.
Yeah.
They made for that war, and surplus would live on for do you think they're going to be military surplus of global war on terror helmets?
It's weird to think about.
No, they're going to be.
Well, I think they
have a shelf
left
life.
them. I think we left them somewhere.
Yeah. Well, there's that too.
Someone has them.
Yeah, someone will sell them back to us.
Someone does. Yeah. But I mean, yeah, what a time to have been alive. I know my grandparents met in a factory making something for, I don't know what, I can't remember what it was.
Well,
but
that's a cool story. That's one of my favorite parts of the Cody Firearms Museum in Wyoming is kind of the part around like the industrialization of all that.
Yeah, I haven't been to the new version. When they did the,
I went out there for a match. I think I walked in the door at like 1:00. They kicked me out because it was closing time and I hadn't seen it all yet.
When the last time I was there, it was you could. My dad, who's not generally interested in this kind of thing, was like, "All right, yeah, let's go."
I'm a slow reader. Don't go to museums with me.
No, and it's a cool place. That's a super cool place.
How about speaking of how neat the story and era and history around the 1911 is, it still has a mystique about it. The firearm has a mystique about it that is not matched by many other firearms in history, I don't think. So for example, the 1911 on the table that is mine was actually a gift to me for it was a graduation present from my folks.
Lucky.
Yeah, I know, right? Super lucky. And so it's like, and I know somebody who got a 1911 for every one of their kids that was born. Like when they were born, they got a new 1911.
Oh, really?
They got their names engraved. And it's like, yep, when they turn 18 or something like that, like they'll get that. That's not something that you do with most anything else that you can buy new on the market today. And you can even do it with a new one, because even when you get a new one, it wasn't built in 1940 by a sewing machine company or something like that, but it was built to a spec, and it has the look and the mystique about it that's like
if you give somebody a gift, like a ceremonial type gift that is a pistol,
that's the one.
It's going to be a 1911.
Yeah, or a Smith J frame. I reserve that right as well.
That's
which is acceptable in my life. Anybody in my life watching this, that is an acceptable gift that you can give me.
I think
any ceremony, really.
Yeah,
Birthday.
I mean, Wednesday, like, whatever.
That harkens back
because it's
to
Wednesday.
Nothing is more human, in my opinion, than a sidearm of some kind, or of weapon.
Nothing is more human than a way to
defend yourself.
It sounds morbid and weird, but
death.
let's think about it. Like, why are we different than the rest of the mammals walking the universe that we know of?
Because we create unique ways to kill other people.
Correct. Yeah.
It is pretty wild. The like, you think of the technology that exists today in really any realm, and a lot of it was sorted out in an effort to kill other people,
destroy each other.
And I think it also comes from an era like Ken Hackathorn said. These come from an era where guns were designed to win wars instead of make a buck. Now, pretty sure these were designed to make a buck too, but
those companies didn't go out of business.
Yeah, if you think about what was going on in the world at that time, we just come out of the Great Depression.
Yeah.
So if you had a job, you were trying to keep it. So if you had a job building pistols at Colt, you wanted to be good at that. And this pistol, one of the reasons it's maybe dated now or we've gone in another direction is because this pistol takes a lot of human interaction to put together. That was the norm back then. And we've evolved away from that. But at that time, one of the things that this gentleman was explaining to me is if you had a job building pistols in the 1930s, those were some of the best ones Colt ever made because those people wanted to keep their jobs. They made all those guns for the war. Okay, so now we have a pistol that has, it's very American in its craftsmanship and its style and all that stuff. And then it lives on. We made so many of them that there's a ton of them on the commercial market. Market was just flooded with military surplus. And so when people started to sporterize them, similar to like what they were doing with Springfields and other things like that in the rifle side, when people wanted to use these war guns for sport, they started to need to modify them and customize them and accurize them. Now we have a guild of pistol smiths that essentially would take you couldn't just buy a new one like this. You had to buy a surplus pistol and send it to a craftsman, and he would essentially fix it. He would weld up the rails and recut them. He would refit a barrel or put a new barrel in. He would completely take all the trigger parts out and put in new trigger parts. So we had this era of gunsmiths that would enhance these. So we had a gun that already has that Americana of craftsmanship in it, and then a specialized artisan would do even more to that, and that lends itself to an era of pistols, and that's kind of what created the era of the custom 1911. And then as we got into the 90s, that became more and more expensive to do. Those pistol smiths were more and more in demand, and there's only so many of them to go around. So then you have guys like Bill Wilson trying to figure out, okay, well, how do I capture lightning in a bottle? And this is part of what triggered when I was at a very influential age for all this stuff. My dad does not remember buying me my first Guns and Ammo magazine, but he did not know what he was doing that day. But like when this is a Guns and Ammo magazine from August 1998. This is not my first one, but this is one of the ones that really swayed me into and got me interested in 1911 pistols. This was when Wilson went from being more of a custom shop, like you send them a Colt, you send them a Springfield, and they'll make it into what you want. They were trying to standardize this as a model. And one of the models was the CQB, their flagship model of today. And so we essentially had the beginning of the era of these brands that they weren't in customizing surplus anymore. They were building from new stock premium pistols. And then that would evolve into more recently, like when I actually became involved in the industry, the thing was we're entering the era of CNC machining. They were essentially trying to CNC machine these things so close that they were kind of machine fit already, even less human hours in them, putting them together. And that kind of evolved even more. Another one I have here, this one was American Handgunner from 2001, and this has a story in it about Larry Vickers, who was kind of mysterious at the time because he worked for this special unit that they couldn't really say, but he would bring parts of pistols on, with him on trips, and he would do them in his hotel room essentially, enhancing. You send him a Springfield, he builds you this. And then so there's this era of these custom pistol smiths that would put even more craftsmanship into these. I think that's kind of what captured a lot of what these pistols are today. And then it's gone in various directions. There's pistol smiths that, heirloom precision, I think you're waiting 2 years maybe to get one, and you pay up front. Or you have folks that have gone the other route, like Springfield and Kimber. They've mass-produced this pistol, but it has, it's a little rougher around the edges and everything in between. But even with good CNC machine fit, most pistol smiths that I know right now, and I'm fortunate enough to know a few of them, they have about 20 to 24 man hours into building a gun.
Yeah.
Even if they start with premium parts that are pretty close already. And so if you go back into that era where that gun was kind of messed up to begin with, they had to re-weld it and recut it and all that stuff. I mean, there's just a ton of labor and human time in these pistols, which I don't think we're getting to today. A couple on top of that is that the patents are all up on 1911s, so a lot of people can do their own version. So a lot of what people perceive as like some of the shortcomings of the 1911, well, that was because we're using war stock that had been mothballed. Magazines are essentially intended to be disposable. Okay, well, if we're using a disposable thing as a reusable thing, nothing will shut down a pistol faster than the magazine. So like the magazines, and there was room for evolution on the magazines. Companies made their entire business on enhanced and reliable 1911 magazines. And I think, getting back to your question, I think we're going to see an interesting era in the polymer pistols because the patents on the Glock are up now. Mm-hmm. So you don't have to modify a Glock anymore. You can just make a generic Glock, and everyone can do their own spin up. Well, yeah, it's like a Glock, but I did it better, And so we're going to get this era of parts that span the whole. There's the people who do it super cheap, and there's people who do super high-end stuff, and there's everything in between, where we kind of went through that with 1911s between the 50s and the late 2000s. I think we're going to start seeing that in some of these polymer frame pistols, where a Glock's not a Glock unless it came in an OG Glock box. But like once it's not in standard trim anymore, it's not necessarily what you perceive a Glock to be. And so I think some of those pistols are going to live out their life cycle similar to what we've seen with the 1911 here, and people are going to say, well, I don't know what they're going to say, 2 GWatts or something like that.
Yeah,
like,
2 GWatts.
You and your kid, like
you're talking about those first pistol smiths and how they kind of had to undo what was done to these guns. Mark and I were having dinner with Jerry, and he was talking about his father-in-law, late gunsmith Jim Clark Sr., and he was talking about how he started with mil-cert pistols that he was buying from catalog. So at the time, those would have been $10, $12. Stripping slides off, as you said, re-welding rails, reshaping rails, just hand filing and hand milling this stuff, tuning these guns up, and that's how he got his start in it.
Yep.
And it's like, what else can you do that with these days?
Novak got his start. He was working for Swenson, I think.
Sure.
And Swenson, Armand Swenson, would give him, I think the story goes, $20 a slide to go home and do the texture on the top that you like of this one.
Yeah.
They essentially, this is machine cut, but this is imitating something that they would essentially do with a file. They would just like
hammer stipple.
They would like hammer on it and like stipple this all up.
$20 an hour. He's got probably, if a guy was sitting there pounding that out, he's got a lot of hours in there.
And that's like, I mean, from what I understand, like guys, legends like Clark, they would build a gun, they would go to the match, they would win the match, and people were like, I like that gun. Yeah. And he's like, you want to buy it? And they would buy it from him. He'd build himself another one, and somebody else would.
He was winning on Sunday, selling on Monday.
You know, his grandchildren today they have a custom 2011 company, Hayes Custom Guns. They still do kind of the same thing. Like, if you want to buy Aaron Hayes' guns, he will sell it to you.
Yeah.
and he'll build another one.
Yeah.
You know, that was kind of their business model of the time.
And those things are just artwork.
Oh yeah.
Yeah, they're lovely.
I think one of the things that I love most about the 1911 is the way that I'm trying to think of another way to say it, because I think what I'm going to say is what everybody says, but to really appreciate it is just the way that they feel. And when it so perfectly anatomically matches the shape of a human hand, but it doesn't make any sense the way that it does when you look at it. And seeing today's polymer frame guns, which all have, you look at some of these guns like the Walthers that have the interesting kind of like curve at the bottom of the frame, or they all have something kind of odd going on. It looks like, or they've really tried to think. They put out all these marketing features like it's got this cut, it's got this accelerator thing, this grip, this step, this. And ultimately, a rectangle with some rounded features and a nice beaver tail with, a slide that looks essentially like bar stock, just with some little cutouts in it, on the outside and some serrations, is the most comfortable thing to hold. Like, you could just hold on to one all day. You wouldn't even realize that you were.
Well, yeah, and that's where, like, when new pistols hit the market now, like, all I see is really, like, stuff that's designed to sell. Like, people, and there were guns, when I was in retail gun sales, it's like they feel good in the store. Like, you could tell somebody to their face, like, that's not a good gun. Don't buy it. Buy this one instead. They're like, yeah, but it feels so good in my hand.
Yeah. What does that even?
Yeah. But they were just hypnotized. You couldn't talk about. We actually had one serial number. I won't name the company, but we had one serial number of a polymer pistol we sold to 5 people. Like, sold new, came back on trade. Sold new, sold used, came back on trade. Sold used, came back on trade. And, like, towards the end, they were like, dude, don't buy that gun. Like, no, buy this gun. And they're like, no, this one feels good. And I'm like, we were like, all right, 502's out. We'll see when it comes back. 2 months later, came back in the door.
Yeah. Yeah, these just, like, and here we are saying just about how good it feels when, also simultaneously saying how silly that can be sometimes to say. But I was saying to Ryan, it's like somebody wore a glove that had sandpaper on the palm and on the inside of the fingers, and they just grabbed onto a 2x4 and just held onto a 2x4 and kind of just like worked it around their hand for like a week or a month, or I don't know how long, and then just whatever was the final shape when they were all done, they lopped off the ends, and they were like, this is what we'll do. And it basically was a rectangle with rounded edges, and
it's got a very slim profile, even in the world of pistols, like a full size.
Sure.
Like more often than not, I carry a full size 1911, not as a flex. It's just like, it just feels good. Like it just,
Sure, it's
it
not
just
just
fits.
like a little flex.
It's a little bit of a flex.
It's okay.
I mean, if you're gonna shoot somebody, like
Do it in style.
go out on top. You know.
Yeah.
You know, the gun
what do
you
they
want to appear, like you guys do the GoldenEye thing. Like if you want, well, like which one do you want to come up? Like that's the one. And like you could make all the arguments why, like, oh, this pistol's better for this reason. It holds these many more bullets and whatever. It weighs however many ounces less. Like, yeah, I don't care. It just feels good. You know.
If Adam subscribes to, you gotta look good to shoot somebody good,
Yeah. Fighting style.
if necessary.
I have a question about what I'm going to call standard configurations.
Okay.
There's one absent from the table, and that would be a champion size.
That's a Springfield term. You're referring to a commander or a officer size.
Officer and champion are the same?
Champion is Springfield's commander, kind of.
Okay.
But
So-
yeah,
Okay, so then what is one shorter than commander?
one shorter than commander's officer.
Wait, like this is a range officer.
So what
Different.
Ryan's talking about, essentially, it's Colt terminology.
Okay.
So government size is the 5-inch gun. That's the quote unquote full size,
Half dust
government
cover,
model, all that stuff.
full hilt.
In the 60s, Colt came out with a abbreviated one that essentially they put a shorter barrel on. So full size frame with a 4.25-inch barrel, that'd be like the Dan Wesson there.
But
That's
full
called
size hilt.
full size heel. Yep.
Yep.
Called a commander's size.
Okay.
Actually available in 9mm. Often slept on. Not super popular because they hadn't figured the magazines out yet. And then they also, Colt commercially came out with one that was even smaller, had a 3.5-inch barrel, and they called that the officer.
Okay, so the officer's model then would be
Yeah.
basically the barrel would be
Yep.
flush with the dust cover.
Yep.
Okay.
And a shorter grip.
Right. So what we would deem or call a subcompact these days.
Yes.
Okay.
Yep. And those nomenclatures from Colt are kind of what the industry standardizes on when they call something a size. So when Springfield wanted to come out with a 4-inch-ish gun, but they didn't want to call it a commander because that's a Colt word, they gave it a term champion.
Okay.
When Wilson Combat wants to come out with one that they don't want to call a commander, they call it professional.
To dispel some myths or solve a mystery for me, that is not to inspire that if it was a commander length gun, it was issued to a commander.
Correct. Those were commercial terms. I think there was some talk of that being done inside the military. Don't think it ever really went anywhere on any notable scale.
Understood.
I think there were a lot of personally purchased ones that would float around when the Army was cooler about that kind of thing.
And then we have I'm not going to call it.
I mean, it appears to me. I mean, just the nomenclature is essentially you're assigning, a rank, if you will.
Yep.
And as it
As you became
goes, as it gets bigger in size, you are also climbing the ladder of
inverse.
rank. Inversely. Okay.
As you give it
The
a higher
grunts.
name rank, it's someone who's less likely to actually need to shoot somebody.
Right, so they just get a little pea shooter.
okay.
Yeah. So like
Even though
Patton
it's
would
still-
carry an officer. He's a general.
Gotcha.
Whereas like a major would carry a commander.
Well, I think
and
a
then-
general at that point is just North American Arms 22.
Well, I
right?
mean, Patton was definitely strapped, so he wouldn't
OG.
get clapped.
Yeah, I don't think he would have. He
Two
wouldn't have taken.
ivory handled
Yeah,
He wouldn't have taken too
third
nice
gen
at it.
Colts.
yeah.
Yeah.
A
No
deuce
good
and a
for
half got him.
Yeah.
It's crazy.
And then when did the 2011 the true double stack, which I suppose was a Caspian, was that the first,
He was there.
or was
so
it SV?
So when people had an interest in trying to make a 1911 that would hold more bullets, right? So the Glock Wonder pistol and the Beretta M9, the Beretta M9 really caught fire after the Lethal Weapon movies. People were like,
Obviously.
yeah, 1911, but it doesn't hold enough bullets. Now, remember, back at the time, this was high capacity because we were coming from 6-shot revolvers, so this had 8 shots, like 2 more. Like, that was a lot. All right, so they wanted to make a higher capacity gun. And then there was a collaboration between Strayer Voigt,
SV.
or Strayer was one guy,
Yep.
and Voigt was the other guy. Both last names. They started SVI. Essentially, they took the top end of a 1911, cut the grip off it, and then made a modular bottom end to it. That was what they would call a 20. This is a 1911, so what's the next thing? The next thing is a 2011.
But not to be confused with the year 2011.
Not to be confused with the year 20. This was in like the
mid-90s?
Mid-90s?
When USPSA, or what eventually turned into it, was still televised.
Right, yeah. So they were trying to make a high-capacity gun that way. And then that company eventually fissured, conflicting business ideas. One guy wanted to be super high-end custom. One guy wanted to be more mass production. And so that is when they split, and SV kind of turned into Infinity, and STI became the more commercial fit gun. And they would use, STI would use a plastic grip, which they would sell as a feature for a long time, like absorbs recoil, which is preposterous, but
Word of the day.
Tell us how you
Word
really
of the
feel.
day.
Way to go.
But anyway, so they kind of two companies, they both, when they split, had rights to the patent of the modular design, the grip module that went on the bottom of a 1911. Two different interpretations of what that meant. And then when the patents expired, then we saw companies like Phoenix Trinity and Chile and Atlas Gunworks started making essentially their own parts because they weren't infringing on anyone's patent anymore. So now we have essentially other interpretations of the modular pistol design.
Oh, and is that
And
when
then we have
2011's really kind of exploded fairly recently?
Yep. And then you see like the Platypus doing it on, they're basing the gun around different magazines. So they'll take an established magazine like a Glock magazine or like a 320 magazine, and then they'll try to make a grip module that adapts to those. Because the biggest weakness of the 2011 style pistol is the magazine that it's based around, because it's still kind of based around something dimensionally meant to be 45 or 40. So a lot of people currently are trying to use a magazine that is scaled for 9mm to make a gun that more readily functions on 9mm, because 9mm isn't 9mm. I mean, 9mm comes in all different bullet weights, all different lengths, all different.
But then if
all
you make
kinds
it
of
take
stuff.
Glock mags, it's going
Velocities.
to have like a weird angle to it.
You
like
can
it's just- I
you
feel like
can
it's gonna be-
hide them in there
That's what the
Can you?
Platypus does.
You're always defending Glock.
because I like them.
I know. I like them too.
But I mean, the thing is the mag in those wide body guns. Like I use a lot of the 2011 style pistols, and the magazines.
That's the crux.
In 2024, the magazines have pretty much been sorted out, but that was what held them back for a long time.
Sure.
Somebody had control over the manufacture of the magazines, and their quality control was, and so that was kind of when Delta was looking at, do we do a Glock or do we do a 2011? Okay, well, we got a 2011 trying to shoot a 40 that's loaded too short in these magazines that are kind of weird. It didn't meet their spec. So, but that's kind of the reincarnation of what will carry 1911s in the future is, the wider body, higher capacity guns, because capacity is kind of what rules the market right now.
People love that capacity.
Yeah, people love. I mean, like 1911s still sell really well, but not the way that 2011s and their derivatives sell, or other platforms.
Most
like
folks
that,
are buying
so.
1911s either for nostalgia or for like a very specific purpose.
Yep.
An example being single stack.
For range toys.
Yeah.
There aren't even very many single stack people anymore. I think a lot of the ones that I've seen in the market or acquired have been people that are like, they like nice things, like
Sure.
they want a Singer Porsche.
Yep.
And so they buy that. A lot of times they buy them and they kind of hold on to them for a while, and they don't
Like-
really do much to them, and then they find the used market, and then when they hit the used market, that's when Adam comes along.
Like a
And he's
vulture.
like, I'm gonna take care of you. You're gonna come with me now, but I'm gonna do mean things to you.
So it's
Daddy's
funny you say
here.
that. I have in my
It's gonna
life
hurt in a good way.
I
Yeah.
have purchased one
You were made for
1911,
this.
Oh yeah,
and I bought a Smith & Wesson Performance Center, one of their semi custom shop, not custom
I
shop.
like those guns.
They are really, it's really
nice.
keen. Shoots very well.
Yeah.
And I got it, one, because it was an astounding deal. I did buy it new, but two, because at that point in my life, I still had somewhat of a fascination with USPSA, and I thought, I'm not that good, but I can at least have fun. I'm going to go shoot single stack. I shot 2 matches, and the magazines are still in their mag pouches. My single stack belt is still assembled, and it is hung on a rack in my garage.
Hung up the belt.
I believe that instance was also videoed and put on Vortex Nation YouTube.
Was it really?
I think. Yeah.
Oh, that goes back. That's funny.
Yeah, that night
So you could-
has been documented.
That was an indoor. You know what happened? First thing I
I
did,
don't remember that.
I brought my gun up and I went, "Huh!" And there was no click because I forgot to.
Yeah, they
the
edited
safety.
that out.
Did they? Good for me. Really cool pistol. Every so often I take it out and I rack the slide. I'm like, I like your tolerances, and I also like the fact that you have an external extractor, which is eclectic and neat.
Yep.
That's a good pickup line.
I like your tolerances.
Hey, honey,
Yeah.
I like your tolerances.
Yeah.
I have one more question about.
This
I'm
one's
gonna
out.
try.
Of,
I'm
this
try
one-
that.
This one's out
I
of spec.
think I'm going to
See
try
if-
that too.
see
See
if-
what she
See what
says.
the wife's. Yeah.
Another question about semi-standard form that you might find these in. There existed, and I believe there is to this day still, a quote short frame 1911.
Yes, I have. I'm waiting on one of those.
Okay, and I think, and correct me if I'm wrong, the first outfit to bring that to life was Springfield Armory in their EMP model.
Oh, we're talking about different things, but yes.
EMP.
Yes,
I
enhanced.
remember you showed me that once, and you were like, "You need to get this," and I was like,
what was it?
"I do."
Enhanced micro pistol.
Yes.
Yeah.
I just like the name.
And essentially they took an officer size
Yeah, because if anybody
1911 and then
tries to
they
come against you, it's lights out.
they essentially built a single stack magazine around 9mm. So they made a narrower magazine lengthwise to accommodate 9mm instead of trying to adapt a 45 magazine to fit 9mm.
And these were petite pistols.
They were.
And they had every merit and attribute of the 1911, and they still make the EMP to this day.
I don't in very small numbers. I
Okay.
think.
And they were a cool gun. Were they 3.5-inch gun?
Yeah.
Bushingless bull barrel.
Yep.
Uh,
So he's talking about at the end here where you get the final lockup on when it goes into battery. Instead of being a bushing, which is turn of the century technology, they would fit a bushing to create the tolerance between the slide and the barrel. They would essentially, that Bob Marvel there,
It's a bull gun.
they would use a fatter barrel that would lock into and lock itself up against the slide.
And
So that's where he's talking bull barrel.
and this is a
So-
segue that I want to get to. in a
Yeah,
little
so anything Glock, M&P, all that, nothing's any modern pistol right now where the barrel just goes, it's kind of bulbous at the end and then locks into place. They're essentially doing bull barrel, but you have to use a fatter barrel in a 1911 to get that tolerance to lock up. But when he says bull barrel, that's what he means.
bit. So that brings us then to this next segue, and that's bushing versus bull.
Mm-hmm.
And you learned me something on the last podcast that we did. We were talking about USPSA, and we were talking about some unusual rules, archaic or otherwise, that existed surrounding the use of a bushing gun or a bull gun. Adam, you're a man of many tastes.
1911s.
And yeah, many 1911s.
Also, yes.
You own and operate examples of both a bushing gun and a bull gun.
Yep.
And in some capacities, like this fine piece of equipment here, this is a hybrid barrel. Could be called a bull, I
That's a bull
suppose.
barrel.
Yeah.
Yep.
Hybrid barrel because it has an island up here that indexes to a very specific cutout in the slide for alignment. We used to call them sight trackers back in the day because that sight used to live on that. What's the skinny? Does a guy buy a bushing gun? Does a guy buy a bull? What's he losing? What's he gaining? Which way or the other?
I think it just comes down to the impulse just feels different. Harley feels different than a sport bike. A German car feels different than a Japanese car. They just feel a little bit different. I tend to like bushing guns better than bull guns. Just the way,
Just the way
just
it
the way they
is.
are. I do have some bull variants, but like I said, most of my personal shooting is match shooting, and in the matches, it's not legal in single stack divisions, so I don't shoot it as much as I would like.
How do you?
But
I mean,
it was kind of like I say, it's an archaic rule. It was really intended to protect a division around a pistol. So like, well, we want a 1911 division. What defines a 1911? Single stack, 45, 8 rounds, and then they said bushing barrel. It's like, yep, that's pretty much this. And so if you try to deviate from that, well, what if we have a caliber we can fit more than 8 rounds in? Oh, not 1911. Well, what if we put a bull barrel in it? Not 1911. What if we put a compensator on it? Not 1911. And that rule just hasn't really been changed. Now, PCSL just came out with a division that they call it practical irons. And in that division, to use a single action trigger, it has to be a 1911 pistol, but I don't know how they would define that. What defines a 1911 pistol in that?
Yeah, that's layers of definitions now.
So that's going down the rabbit hole. But generally speaking, back to Ryan's question, the barrels themselves are thinner, so you get kind of a pencil barrel, if you will, if we were to use AR terms. And the way it locks up when it pops into battery, the way that feels is what's different between them. And I like the way that the bushing comes to rest more so than a bull gun. This is a very nice one, but like just kind of they don't
click.
They don't cinch down as much. Yeah. You know, they kind of pop right into place.
Now,
it's kind of like when you close the door of a vehicle from like the 50s and 60s, and it's like that nice little mechanical click.
Yes.
Versus just closing a car door now and you just hear.
Yeah. Or like knives, you know, like cheap flipper knives, you know, that you got, you know, for free from wherever, or a higher end.
Like a ZT320.
ZT or a Benchmade or something like that, like something that has some class to it.
Mark's pulling out his Beretta.
Snaps, you know.
Oh wait, what is that?
I mean, even like
it's a Benchmade.
Like the OG, the Vortex knives, like just the, you know, it's.
So you don't arrive at that statement though, just based solely on you're not sitting there at the gun store, Adam Maxwell, and going,
actually.
Or is this you?
Right.
This is you.
You know Adam better than we do, and I'm already
So I'm fascinated by Adam the Creature, because I imagine. Okay, so
somebody shows me their 1911, they want me. I'm like, garbage.
But when you're shooting it, are you as somebody who shoots not just 10,000 rounds a year, but tens of thousands of rounds a year?
Sure.
Are you a person who arrives at that feeling because of your reps and iterations with the system? Because I imagine if I blindfold you and I give you 2 guns, and I give a bushing gun a full dust cover, and I give a bushing gun a full dust
configured the same.
Yeah, and I give you weight as equal as possible.
I can tell you the difference.
Okay, that's what I'm saying.
Let's do a video.
And that's you.
Add it to blind. The list.
Are we supposed to do blind shoot tests?
That is you having explored this system
go wrong?
On a professional capacity in competition for the better part of a decade.
Well, that's like when we talk about the 40 blaster that we talked about in the USPSA episode. So this is chambered in 40. All right. I load the 40. I use a 10 millimeter magazine in it, and I load 40. Even though the case is shorter, I of course do not recommend you do this at home, and this is not endorsed by anyone at Vortex or Sammy for that matter. I load it to 10 millimeter length. Like my 40s are this long.
And that's a reliability and feeding thing.
Yeah, and that's because I can feel the amount of time that this thing was free in there, and then how it hits the feed ramp and then goes up underneath the extractor. The longer bullets feel better. Now, can I measure that on a shot timer and be like, oh yeah, I shoot the longer ones better? No. But you shoot enough of them a year, it's like, well, I'm making them. I can make them however I want. I make the ones that feel good.
You're the chef.
Yeah. So that's kind of seasoned to taste. Like that's kind of one of those things. Like, shoot the bullet, pretty, put it in the net. I'm doing that now. but that's where like when like the locomotive, like how it all feel like when it hits. And same thing, like some of these guns have ramped barrels, and some of them have more the traditional style cut, where like the original 1911, part of the feed ramp is in the frame, part of it is dished out, and the cartridge actually like hits the frame and then goes up into the barrel. Some of them have a feed ramp similar to what you'd see on a contemporary Glock or a Smith & Wesson, where it has that little dingus hanging down there that is the feed ramp. I can feel the difference between a ramped barrel and a non-ramped barrel, and I prefer the traditional ramp.
Really?
Yeah, but it's just because it's a more abrupt transition when the cartridge comes out of the magazine and presents to the chamber. It essentially more violently snaps up and underneath the extractor, and that's all layered on top of things that you can feel in a gun. Now,
and you're saying you like that?
Yeah. Well, I like the slower, smoother transition than the snap.
Oh, okay, gotcha.
But that's all stuff that, like, you know, it's kind of like where you set your driver's seat in your car. Like, you can put it wherever you want. Does it really matter? No. But, like, again, if you can pick, that's what I pick. So, and that's some of what, like, guns that I like, guns that I don't like. It's how they feel under locomotion. Same thing. There's certain hammers I like and I don't like just because of the way they snap, like just how fast they fall down.
You have arrived at what I
have a problem.
No. You get to a point when you're really good at things, you can explore the seconds that exist between seconds.
Yeah.
That's a place in time and space that your average person maybe can't, right? Mm-hmm. And so you've gotten to the point where you have walked through that door in the space-time fabric, and you get to explore those seconds that exist within seconds.
Same thing with what we call tri-topping. So the traditional profile of a barrel or a slide, and then they essentially make 3 angular cuts on them to take some material off. So this slide is physically lighter than a traditional 1911 slide, cycles faster, feels different.
Preference?
That's a tough one. See, that's the one where it's like I like the traditional style better, so I might just like ignore that the tri-top feels better.
I understand.
But like for
it makes perfect sense to me.
For score, I have to see, that's where it's like I have to depart from the guns that I like to shoot the guns that score better in the game.
Well, Adam, let's be honest though, you're not, when you're going for score, you're also not doing it in a full USGI uniform and helmet and all that. So I mean, you know, if you got to go tri-top on
that's not my game.
Not yet. But if you got to go tri-top on the 1911, it's
actually,
not like
if I were going to do that, it would be like a 90s vintage FBI HRT get up, like big juggernaut suit like they used to wear in SWAT
with the shoulder pads.
Yeah, with the shoulder pads. That's how I would LARP if I had to LARP.
That's how I would LARP.
I was really hoping you were going to go USGI style, because then I would say I'd crawl out of the depths of my basement and I'd get myself an 1897 trench gun and come shoot pump class.
Well, that's true. Yeah.
That'd be cool.
Man, you've talked about just like the way they shoot, the way they feel. Like, what else do you like, or what are you drawn to about the 1911 platform that you've obviously been enamored by for quite a long time?
Yeah. I never thought I would get to this point, but I have gotten to this point.
Wait, we haven't gotten into the part yet that you didn't think you'd... Okay.
There are a lot of pistols now that are not accurate enough for me.
Yes.
I shot...
Wow.
I'm not even going to name the company, but it's a company you'd pay a lot of money for their pistol. Like, you pay more than $1,000 to have one. And I shoot it, and I'm like, it is to spec. There's nothing wrong with the pistol, but the groups are not tight enough. There are pistols on this table that don't do that. But like,
Adam's problem with the pistol is he's too good.
It's not that I'm too good. It's just that, like, it's just like I want
not
that
too good. I'm not saying like you're like
margin.
I'm too good for you from like an ego perspective. Like,
you're
able to notice.
They don't build good enough to realize when it's the gun or when it's you.
Yeah, like there's mainstream pistols by and large are not as precise as high-end 1911s are. you get a little bit more accuracy, you get a little bit more refinement on the trigger. So those two things together, there's a smaller circle of influence where that bullet could land, and you have a more finite control over when you let it go. And I just can't get that with very many other platforms of pistol. I'm like, a CZ is close.
Sure.
You know, maybe a Tanfo, like a tuned up Tanfo, close. But it's not quite, and like given the choice, I just like these better. Like you could probably get there with those, but like I just like these a little bit better. But by and large, the polymer frame, pistols, and even if I, my friends who are into other platforms, M&P guy, it's like, okay, what? So you just buy an M&P 2.0 and you shoot? Well, no, I changed the barrel and I changed the trigger and I do this grip mod to it, and so I'm like, oh well, it's not an M&P anymore. Like they had to hop it up to get to where they want it. And even then, when they do those, it's still not like these. I actually talked to a very high level competitor who shoots professionally for a gun company. I think you know who I'm talking about. He's very short.
Oh yeah, no, yeah.
Yeah, he was helping somebody with their 2011 pistol from his old job, and he said, I hate touching these things because I'm reminded that I miss them.
And I can't shoot.
Oh.
Yeah, he can't shoot 2011s anymore. He has to shoot for this other company. He's like, because that's what he's promoting. So it's like, it's just often imitated, never duplicated.
What's so
Indeed.
crazy about that, though, is like how it's, in essence, it's just not new.
It's not.
No.
And
we tried.
We've got a lot of great mousetraps.
A lot of great mousetraps
That might be better in some ways, right? Depending on how you want to, attack the problem or look at it, or your perspective, or what you're looking for in a pistol, what your needs are. However, I mean, and we talked about this earlier. It's I'm going to read this excerpt from this article, but in same articles before. In 1985, when the Army officially retired the Colt 45 in exchange for the Italian-made 9mm Beretta, the adjustment was less than harmonious. Many veterans and experienced officers would come forth to attest their loyalty to the Colt, but the necessity to conform to NATO regulations remained. The M1911 ended its career just shy of 80 years, boasting a much longer lifespan than most arms and equipment could ever achieve. And so it did that.
Mm-hmm.
But as we've discussed, its life is not over.
Mm-hmm.
And then even in the intro, Adam, you're saying how it's being rekindled again. You still love these things for what they are. And not just because of a nostalgia thing, but because of the performance aspect. And I mean, that's just mind-blowing to me.
Oh, yeah. It makes no real sense.
I mean, to me, it
makes sense if you don't think about it.
man, I drive the Model T because it performs better than a lot of the ones today.
Right.
Like, no.
Yeah. Not a thing. What would even be contemporary to that? Like,
I think of your Benelli analogy was really good.
mean,
Contemporary to what?
I mean, I've worked with
like
a lot
the
of
M2 machine gun is still in service, but
oh yeah.
I mean, it's like, how do you improve on that?
Baller.
And I think though Benelli for the average gun listener is a good one, right? So the inertia driven system from the original Black Eagle design was I think perfected effectively out of the gate. Some spring rate changes when we got different ammunition, but I remember when the patent went up on that, and all of a sudden the market is flooded with inertia-driven guns. Some great, some not great, and that it still holds up. And that's an old auto-loading shotgun design. If you really audit it in comparison to things like you had the Model 11 JMB design, by the way, the Auto 5, and then you had gassers like the 1100, the 1187 then, and then early 80s, the Black Eagle comes out, and man, that set a precedence. And to me, that's like another example of something that just nailed it. And I don't know how you make it better.
Yeah. The first one I bought, still the one that I'm shooting.
Yeah.
I've had friends of mine have explored the other platforms.
Like a boomerang, they come back.
They keep coming back.
You just
Why
made.
bother?
I remember when my dad he bought a Super Black Eagle, and in my mind, I'm like, oh, that wasn't that long ago.
I think it was 1979.
That was
What?
a long time.
Is it that long ago when the Black Eagle came out?
Really? Oh man, I would have put it in the 80s somewhere.
I got it.
Like
I
the
might be
late
wrong.
80s.
I thought it was a 70s child.
Didn't they call it a Super 90 because it was like 1990 or
The
something?
operating system. No, the Black Eagle predates that. Maybe not.
Maybe.
The Super 90 operating system is what it's officially called.
Oh,
Yeah, I have to look. Now I got to know. But go on. That's another great podcast, I think. By the way,
I was going to say, well, maybe we have
Sounds like a good one.
on the books. One last question, and maybe you've covered a lot of these things, Adam. But like, what traits, like what are the signature traits of a 1911 that make it a 1911?
well, that kind of gets back to like that like USPSA trying to define it. I think.
Well, but like, are you asking in Adam's world?
I don't know, just like operationally,
I think
function, takedown.
categorically, a 1911 would be something. Either it's a tilting barrel, single stack, steel frame, or at least metal frame pistol, either chambered in 45 or based around the 45 caliber, with a single action trigger.
Okay.
And a thumb safety lockup. I would say that would be defining more or less.
Mm-hmm.
A lot of mine are 5-inch guns. They tend to have the beaver tail, which makes them a bit more ergonomic. That's kind of a contemporary 1911 update with the bobbed hammer, commander style hammer that comes with it. Most of them have extended thumb safeties now compared to the GI version of it, because they weren't designed to be cocked and locked as is out there. Jeff Cooper publicized that and kind of made that the contemporary fighting pistol way. But they have the extended thumb safeties that make that ergonomic and capable to do. And then I tend to like ones with cocking serrations out in the front. That's an option. That's debatable style-wise.
Sure.
I have them with and without light rails. And then I usually have a Maxwell on the bottom of them. Just because the gamer in me. I like fast reloads. And so I usually have some kind of Maxwell on them. They're usually kind of the contemporary beaver tail commander hammer style, and some variation of 5-inch. The rest from there is just touch points. But actually the cocked and locked thing, when the pistol was originally designed, the thumb safety was put there because the cavalry, which was still a thing in the actually like horseback cavalry was still a thing in the Army, they were very opposed to this because they didn't want to, they were worried about how would this all work when we had galloping horses and we didn't need to shoot anymore. So the original design just had the grip safety. Cavalry added the thumb safety, but all the military doctrine around these was really that it was carried with an empty chamber or with the hammer down. And then when Jeff Cooper created Gun Sight, the destination gunfighting traveling destination school, he was the advocate for cocked and locked, using that thumb safety. And by and large, the debate is over. It is widely agreed upon that cocked and locked, loaded, hammer cocked with the safety on, is the safest and most effective way to carry the pistol. But that was a very late 80s, 90s thing that really evolved.
I mean, like you always hear the term, cocked and locked.
Mm-hmm.
And that must be.
It's a great.
That is
term.
where
from.
it came from. Yeah.
I did not.
Fantastic
I know that now.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
Get this, 1967.
Oh, for the Benelli?
Yeah.
Nice.
Are you kidding me?
67?
Yeah. That was when the inertia system came to be.
Right there with the MP5.
The Super Black Eagle was the 3.5-inch variant of the Black Eagle.
Okay. And that would have been
Like
mid to late 90s?
Early 90s.
Early 90s. Yeah. Okay. Gotcha. Adam.
Bringing it full circle.
I know.
I think you'll.
Well, that's
I
like
think you'll also appreciate the one with the flashlight. Actually, based on a video game gun. That's from Modern Warfare 2.
I was gonna say this is the Modern Warfare 2.
Yep.
Right at the beginning.
Yep.
You never.
Dope.
Yeah.
No.
It was in college. It's fine.
I was in
Ryan,
college.
what do you have against
I was
people who
experimenting.
played COD?
I don't have anything against him. I just hold Adam at a place of reverence in my head and heart that
They put the 1911 in a game like one
Dude,
time. I had to get
like
the gun.
3/4 of the guns that are like white whale guns for me are from Call of Duty Modern Warfare 2, Ryan.
It's
And
just
I thought we hang out. So.
listen.
yeah.
I
Where
thought
you at?
Adam still writes letters on a typewriter.
Oh.
Okay, here I think I see where you're coming from. You see this.
Yes, and I think there's no way he's ever seen a gaming console in his life.
Right.
There's no chance.
And if you're not
I mean, the
watching
last
on
one I
YouTube,
had
I'm,
was an Xbox 360.
I don't know what that means.
Still pretty new.
You changed, man.
It was 17 years ago now.
It's true. You're right. You know.
Jeez. Right.
Like-
forgive and forget.
Like 10 years ago wasn't
Let
the
it go.
90s anymore.
That hurts.
I know.
That ain't right, man. All right.
It's been
I don't
great.
want it to end.
This
Got to
is
end
good.
sometime, but we've got some foreshadowing, I think, with the Benellis. We'll talk about those at some
Yeah, we
point.
need to do a
So,
Benelli episode.
Adam, thank you so much. It's always just an absolute pleasure having you join us. Your knowledge is just it's impressive.
There's
Lack of
so
a
much
better.
in
I don't
there.
have a better. I was trying to find a better word. I should have, but I'm just always astounded by it. I always enjoy it. I always learn so much. It's just fun hearing you talk. It makes my job incredibly easy because I just listen to you talk, and then Ryan's hitting record, and then
I think the University of Wisconsin would be alarmed at how much I learned about 1911s while in their institution.
I would hope that they would.
You know
be
what though?
impressed.
You also
My
came
parents
out
would
of
be
there.
disappointed.
No, you had a fantastic career in your respective degree field.
Yeah,
for a
this
period
worked
of
out a lot
time.
better.
Ryan, thank you. Jim, thank you. Thanks everybody for listening. And yeah, until next time, we'll catch you on the next one. Maybe it'll be on the Black Eagles. So
Benelli inertia driven system.
fantastic.
Cool.
Bye everybody.
See ya.
See ya.
There you have it, folks. Thank you very much for listening. As usual, give this video a like if you liked it, comment something below, and give us a subscribe to the Vortex Nation podcast channel. It would mean a lot to us. Also, why don't you give us a follow over on Instagram while you're at it, at Vortex Nation Podcast. We'd love to hear from you over there, and we'll keep you updated with all kinds of cool photos and videos from our adventures that we do here. Otherwise, we will see you on the next one. Thank you again. Happy hunting and shooting, everybody. Have a good one.